today we have a special one in terms of the topic, and not just the topic, but also we have a special guest. So today's session is on addressing granularity mismatches in Power BI. And I think it's more like a different way from the ways we are used to. And fine. So this session is being brought to you by Enterprise DNA. They are the official sponsor. And then there is also UrBizEdge. We are the ones also who are powering the whole event. And if you have not joined our meetup community, the Power BI learning community, later on we share the link so that you can always be abreast of all that we are doing. And about Enterprise DNA is a learning and is a complete, I refer to them more as a complete educational platform, not just about you learning in a passive way, but also they create a lot of opportunities for you to, participate in events, to put to use what you are learning in a very active way. So there's a learning center, showcases, Power BI Challenge, Power BI Accelerator, all what you see in this slide. And more importantly, you can become a member by going to enterprisedna.co/membership. Again, I will drop that in the chat box. Next slide. Good. There's an ongoing Power BI challenge. It's challenge 17. It's about environmental data reporting. Again, my colleague will drop the link of how you can be part of the challenge in the chat box. So I think it runs up until close to the end of this month. And then what about us, UrBizEdge? We are a Microsoft Excel consulting, financial modeling, business intelligence, data analysis, and enterprise solutions firm. You see, it's a mouthful, but we need to call everything so that, there's clarity to what we do. And we are more into just training and helping people learn these things better. And if you need any training needs, especially in-person training, and you're in Nigeria, please reach out to us. So the next slide. And these are the classes we have coming up soon. Again, these ones you can access on our website, so I don't want to take too much time. Next slide. So to the main thing. And our session today, we have Brian Julius. He's the Chief Content Officer for Enterprise DNA. You must have been seeing him in our other sessions before now. He's also one of our very active participants, and many of you would have maybe not heard him unless he maybe unmutes himself and says something during the session, but you will have noticed him in the sessions. And so it's like we have been, again, rubbing mind with someone who is part of the family. And is responsible for developing and implementing Enterprise DNA's member training curriculum. And I want to say is someone who I don't know of anyone I can say is comparable to. In my mind, by my own judgment, is in a class of his, because three things. There's value that he wants to give. And then he's the one who is going to put in more effort to give you the value than you are going to get the value. And so I kind of wonder that, he's looking like he's doing all the giving, and then he's a lot more flexible, he's putting more effort into it than even maybe me or the other person who is expecting to get all of this. So, and maybe that's his person, I don't know, but I greatly appreciate that in him. All that we have going on together with Enterprise DNA, I would say, is all because of him. And then he's worked with the US government in different data-driven roles. So his family, if you read you can see why I'm laughing. He's got a very wonderful wife, and then he says he's got two poorly behaved cats too. So I don't know if the cats agree, but then I definitely find that funny. So over to you, Brian. It's a pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you, Michael, for that very kind introduction. I'm very honored to be here today. We've formed a great partnership between your learning community and enterprise DNA. And I come here a lot, just not as a sponsor, but just as a somebody who loves Power BI and loves data analysis, and finds the guests and the sessions that you all run to be terrific. So I'm often here just as a participant and a fan. So it's a real pleasure for me to be presenting here today, and I hope to live up to the standard that you guys set every week in terms of really excellent presentations. And I just know from my content work that putting these sorts of sessions together takes a lot of work, and the fact that you do 3 of them a week is amazing. Most of the other user groups I work with do 1 a month, and so the fact that you're doing 12 or more a month is just phenomenal. And so really wanted to shout that out, and again just express my joy at being here today. So let me share screen.
Yes, you can.
We worked on this before. Here we go. And let me.
Yes. It has come up.
There we go. Is that showing up right?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about addressing granularity mismatches in Power BI. And when Michael asked me to present earlier this summer, he said you can present on any topic you want. And that was kind of overwhelming. So I thought, what am I going to present on? And originally I thought, my wife asked me what I'm going to present on. I said, I'm going to present on the magic of disconnected tables. And she's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then later in the day, I came back to, I changed my mind. I'm going to do addressing granularity mismatches. And she was like, She's like, doesn't sound as interesting. But in thinking about it, the reason I went with this one is both because it's a problem that comes up all the time, that if you work with financial data or sales data or budgeting data, it's one you've either very likely come across or definitely will in the future. And the other thing I found about this is that in the course of working on this issue, I came across some information and some philosophies about working in Power BI that really changed the way I do all my work now in Power BI, not just in the granularity mismatch area, but really in every aspect of my Power BI analysis and reporting. So I wanted to share that with you because I think there's some interesting food for thought in examining kind of your base assumptions about how you look at Power BI and how you work in Power BI. So when we talk about granularity, what is granularity? And simply put, it's the level of detail or summarization of your data. And for me, the best example of this is time series data, where you've got data that could be could even go out further than year, but it could be year, quarter, month, day, hour, minute, second. And when we talk about granularity, one of the really confusing things is people will talk about high granularity or low granularity. And the interesting thing is I was up late last night checking sources on this, and that most sources will say high granularity is at this end of the spectrum. It's the low level of detail, and low granularity is down here. And so if we look at the quote, it says, since the lower level of detail, the larger amount of data in the fact table. Now that uses a construct where high granularity is up here, low is here. But then I went to the references for the data modeling course I took from SQL BI at MBAS a few years ago, and they use it exactly the reverse. They say low granularity is the low level of detail, high granularity is the high level of detail. And so my my recommendation in terms of granularity is to not use high and low, but to use coarse and fine. So I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Okay.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes. What about now? Is it gone?
That's gone. Yeah, thank you. So coarse granularity is this lower level of detail. Fine granularity is the high level of detail, and that's typically the way I'm going to refer to it. So the question is, why is it important? And the reason it's important is that the level of granularity determines what analyses you can do on your data and whether the results from those analyses will lead to the appropriate conclusions. And so if we go back, for example, and we think about different types of analyses. So for example, the data challenge that Michael highlighted in his introduction is about environmental data. And some of that data is climate related. And that level of granularity operates on a year basis. It doesn't make any sense to talk about climate changing on a minute or second or hour basis. You know, weather changes quickly, but climate changes very slowly. And so on the other hand, we had a recent challenge that dealt with ambulance response times. And it makes no sense at all to talk about that on a year, quarter, or month basis, even a day basis. You know, that really comes down to the relevant granularity there is response time down to the second, because we're talking about life-saving measures. And so minutes and seconds really matter on that. So you really need to fit the granularity to the type of analysis you're doing and the conclusions you want to make. And so one of the things that is critical is this statement from Kimball and Ross. And Kimball is really kind of the father of modern dimensional modeling. And it says a row in a fact table corresponds to a measurement. A measurement is a row in a fact table. All measurements in a fact table must be at the same grain. And that's something we instinctively know, I think, but seeing it there is really important, because what we'll find is that while we've got all the measurements in a fact table at the same grain, oftentimes what we have are multiple fact tables, and those fact tables may operate at different grains. And that is where we run into challenges. And so if we have a mismatch of granularity of tables at different granularities within the same data model, if we don't address that, it can lead to incorrect or incomplete results. At best, it's going to be incomplete. At worst, it's going to be just completely wrong. And we'll show some very clear examples on that. And examples of common granularity mismatches happen in budget and finance all the time. So your expenditure data is typically on a daily basis. And so you have a large fact table with, you know, maybe a transaction level table that is at a daily granularity. But your budgets may actually be at a monthly, a quarterly, or even an annual level. And so the question is, how do we combine that data from the daily granularity to, let's say, the monthly granularity, and get results that are meaningful and address all the questions in the analyses that we want to do? In particular, what's the current actual versus budgeted? And that's a very common question, and that's going to be the focus of what I talk about today. So the general strategy in dealing with granularity mismatches is you allocate your measurements down to the finest granularity that you need for analysis. So in the case I just talked about, where we've got monthly budgets and daily expenditure data, we allocate down to the daily level, and then we aggregate up as needed. It's always easy when you've got in Power BI to aggregate up to a higher level. So it's a sum or a SumX command, and you just do that in the proper context to get to that level of aggregation that you need. And so The techniques for allocation, there are really two. One of which is DAX using virtual relationships, because when you create a table, a calculated table in DAX, that you can incorporate that directly into the data model, but you can't manipulate that within Power Query. And that's going to be a big issue that we're going to talk about. The second way is actually in Power Query using physical relationships. So when we talk about DAX, we're going to be talking about doing that with virtual relationships, specifically using treat_as. There are other functions such as intersect and contains that you can also use to create virtual relationships among tables. But for the sake of this this discussion, we're going to use treat_as, which is the most flexible of the functions. If you're in a situation where, and I believe, I don't work in direct query much, but I believe there are some limitations in the use of treat_as, and in that case, intersect will work. But the point here really being, and I have spoiler alert, the second option, the Power Query option, is going to be a lot better, and that's really the revelation that I had in working with this, because for a long time I did it using DAX and treat_as, and it worked fine. But there's some real advantages to that second approach, and we'll talk about that. But before we do, I want to talk about Matthew Roach's maximum of data transformation. And for those of you not familiar with Matthew Roach, he's a senior program lead for Microsoft. He's a really interesting guy. He's a fascinating follow on Twitter. He's very active on social media, and has written, at least for me, what is probably the most influential article I've ever read on Power BI. And I've got the link down here. And in that, he goes through what he calls Roach's maximum of data transformation. And the conclusion here is data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. And when he talks about upstream and downstream, what he's talking about is upstream is closer to where the data is produced, and downstream is closer to where the data is consumed. And the point being that by transforming the data closer to the source, you can reduce costs, you can increase transparency, you can increase clarity. It definitely simplifies, in my mind, the transformations, and particularly the DAX at the downstream level. And so when we talk about Roach's maxim applied to Power BI, we look at two things, one of which is always the question of, should I do something in DAX or in Power Query? And the short answer through Roach's maxim is do it in Power Query. And then the other question is, okay, if I'm looking to do it in Power Query or the data warehouse, if I happen to have a nice data warehouse with, a SQL database administrator, and I can get the data directly from that data warehouse already transformed, what should I do? And the answer is do it in the data warehouse. And we'll see why, but by doing that, what it really emphasized to me was that, at least for myself, and I think for a lot of people who start in Power BI, we rely way too heavily on DAX. That we do a lot in DAX, and I think it's people start in Power BI. I think many of the people who teach DAX are great at it. They get you excited about DAX, and you start using DAX as kind of the first resort rather than the last resort. And kind of looking at DAX through the lens of Roach's maxim, you should really be using DAX primarily just when something needs to be dynamic within the course of a reporting session. And if it doesn't need to be dynamic within that reporting session, you want to push it further upstream into Power Query or into the data warehouse. And so when we talk about Roche's maxim, one of the things that is going to be really important for the work that we're going to show today is date tables. And with regard to Roche's maxim, you can create your date table from the data warehouse or from Power Query, but in this case, not from DAX. And I saw a recent poll on LinkedIn about where people create their date tables, and I was surprised at the number of people who were doing that in DAX. And again, the reason that DAX date tables are problematic is that any sort of DAX calculated table cannot be accessed or manipulated in Power Query. And that's going to be essential for this approach. And so I'll kind of put a little advertisement in here in terms of, with regard to Power Query and date tables, I think the best one I've ever seen by a wide margin is the one developed by Melissa DeCorte, who is an enterprise DNA expert and our in-house Power Query guru. And she has developed what we call the extended date table. And this is an amazing piece of work. It's free on the forum. It's incredibly comprehensive. It's got over 50 fields. It's configurable. It's very well documented. And it has a number of features that I won't get into today. Melissa and I actually did a 7-part YouTube series that I have the link for below to talk about kind of all the features and functions that are unique in here that will really make working with particularly time intelligence data much, much easier than if you're using a standard date table. So this is free for anybody to download. We've got a cheat sheet that explains every field in the date table and a YouTube series on how to use it. So definitely something to check out if you're not currently using that. So let's get out of PowerPoint. Let's jump into Power BI, and let's start really digging into this granularity issue. Okay, so what we've got here is a very simple model. This is actually a data set that I pulled off of Kaggle. It's a superstore. It's I believe an office supply superstore, and it's just a very standard sales data model, star schema. We've got our dates table, which in this case we use Melissa's extended date table, locations dimension, products dimension, and customers dimension. And our dates, we've got an order date and a ship date in our sales table. And the sales table is at a daily granularity. So if we jump in here and look at that, sorry, the Teams thing is blocking my view. We jump in here and look at sales. Yeah, we'll see order date and ship date at that daily granularity. And so the other thing we've got is we've got budgets or targets. I call them budgets here because I'm just used to working in the government for so long, working on a budget construct rather than a target. But you can think of these as monthly sales targets. And these are at a monthly level, and we can jump in and look at these. So really pretty simple. What we've got is just month and year. We've got the numeric field for sorting that, year, month number, and the amount, our budget amount. And so the challenge we've got is basically in this data model, how do we incorporate these monthly budgets at that monthly granularity into a model that has got daily expenditure data? And I want to talk about a few ways that you might try initially, and there were certainly ways that I tried, and I've seen others try as well. And And it's worth, I think, going through kind of why those are not going to work. So let's just jump in. And let's say, what if we just connect our table based on month and year? So we've got this month and year field here. And if we jump down here to our monthly budget and connect that. Okay, so the first thing we have a problem right off the bat, which is everything coming from the date table to our fact tables should be a one-to-many relationship. And in this case, it's a many-to-one. And so that's going to be a problem right off the bat. And if we jump in here and we take our total budget amount, which is just a very simple measure, just the sum of the monthly budget amounts, and we drop that into our, let me just move my Teams out of the way, and we drop that into our chart here, we see right away that that doesn't work at all. That what that does is that just gives us the total budget amount for the entire table. So that's going to be a problem we can see right away. So let's take a look at that, and let's do something that I don't ever want to do on camera, but I want to show it just for the sake of argument, just to see what happens, and that is to change this to a bi-directional relationship. And we want to avoid that in really almost every conceivable case. But I just want to show what happens here. So if we change that to bi-directional, and then we take a look. Okay, now that looks okay. That is actually the right numbers. And so we might think, okay, that's the potential solution, and it's not, because watch what happens if we drill down into the daily level. It blows up, and it just shows us the total budget for the month. It does not recognize the daily granularity. And so in general, I'm showing you that just to show that there's not a simple way to use bidirectionals to get a solution here. I think in general, you want to avoid bidirectionals in almost every conceivable context, because if you want to read something kind of truly terrifying, there's a SQL BI article about bidirectional relationships and ambiguity. And what they show is that by taking a very simple star schema model, nothing complex, and introducing one bidirectional relationship into the middle of it, what it does is it creates tremendous ambiguity within the model. And that ambiguity results in basically undermining the whole foundation of the DAX calculations. And what's really terrifying when you read that article, and somebody told me this once, I wish I remembered who had this quote, is that obviously wrong information is embarrassing. Subtly wrong information is what gets you fired. And what they show you in this article is that the introduction of the bidirectional relationship produces numbers that are wrong, but they don't look wrong. And they're not the kind that every once in a while you'll do something in Power BI and it'll show you like $7 trillion. And you go, okay, I know that's wrong. But in this case, the numbers that are produced in the example, they look right. And so we just generally want to avoid in any sort of solution for resolving mismatched granularities. We want to avoid the use of bidirectional relationships at all costs. So let's try one other thing that I've seen people do quite commonly, and let's go into into Power Query to do this. And one of the things I've seen people do, and frankly I've tried to do myself early on, is to say, okay, we've got this daily expenditure data. Can we take our monthly data and turn it into daily data? So can we basically say, like, let's pretend that the date here, so January, that happens on January 1st of every month. And so let's take our month, our year, and our month number, and let's create a column from examples, and let's call this first date. And we can take month number, and then day, and then 2020. And then in this one, this is 2. Okay, and so this now is smart enough to pick up. I'm always amazed at how well the column from examples picks up the patterns. And so if we look what it's doing here, it's text combined. It's text from the month number, then it puts the day as 1, which is first day of the month, and then the text from the year. And so let's accept that. And then we'll change that to a date field. And let's close and apply. And let's see how this works. Okay, so in our data model, what we want to do now, want to wait for that to apply. And then, we want to go date, and then connect that to first date. Okay, and this says 1-to-1, and we always want to change 1-to-1s to 1-to-many and make that unidirectional, which it lets us do. Let's wait for that to change. Okay, so that's now moving from the right table to the correct table in the right direction, unidirectional filter. So let's see how that works. Okay, and what we can see here is if we drill up, this is going to be problematic as well, because what it's done, it's actually pulled in the correct target amounts, but what it's done now is it's filtered the actual data only to the first day of the month, and so that's not going to work either. So those are kind of common ways I've seen people try to do this, and those are not going to work. And so we're going to have to take a little bit more detailed approach here. And if we go back to the earlier slide, what we need to do is we need to allocate our monthly data down to the daily level. And there are two ways we can do that. And the first way is through DAX. And this is the way I did it for a long time before I came across the second method. And I want to walk through the DAX in this. It looks complicated, but it's actually doing something that I think is fairly straightforward if you break it down. So we break it down by variables, and we look at days in context. And days in context is just count rows of the dates table. And so if we look back here, if we were to think about, a table right here, where we drop that in, that's going to be counting days in context. So it's going to be counting the number of days in January of 2020, the number of days in February 2020. And if we were to drill down to the daily level, it would just count that day as one day. So instead of counting 31 days as days in context, it would just count one. And so then what it's doing is calculating days in month. So it's count rows of dates, taking the filter off of all the filters off of the dates table, and then replacing the context with month and year. So it's doing a count rows for every month and year. So we're getting the number of days in that month. Current month, it's just selecting the current month in context. And then the monthly budget amounts, it's calculating the total budget amount, which if we remember from a few minutes ago, is just the sum of the target budgets. And the kind of the rub here is treat as. And what treat as is doing is treat as is creating a virtual relationship between our dates table and our monthly budgets table. And that's what's been lacking. That's what's been causing the problems in terms of getting the proper numbers into that chart. And so this creates that relationship. And what it does is it transfers the filter from this one column table, which is the month and year column, to the month and year of the monthly budgets table. So what it's basically doing is it's taking and creating from month and year in the dates table right here. It's taking all the unique values of that and transferring the filter to the month and year column here. So it's creating kind of, if we were to think of kind of an imaginary dotted line between these two tables, and creating that in a one-to-many way, so that it, as if that were a physical relationship connected in the proper way. And so if we go back to that measure, okay, so we've got now it calculating the monthly budgets correctly using that virtual relationship. And then what it finally does is, then this is where the allocation comes in. So we look and say, okay, if, and then it has one value is the way of determining kind of what the proper context we're in is. So if it has one value of dates, the date column in the dates table, that says we're in a situation where that context in the table field is at the day level. And if it finds has one value at the month and year level, then we're in the situation of it being at the month level. And so if it's one of those two, then it comes down here. If it's not one of those two, what it means it's in the total row where there is no specified context, in which case it just calculates the total budget amount for the entire table. But in cases where it finds the context, what it's doing is it's taking the day in context, so the number of days either in that month or in that day, dividing by the days in the month, and then multiplying that by the budget amount for that month. And so, for example, if this were January and it were finding that we were at the daily level, it would take and find the January budget amount and multiply that by 1 divided by 31. So just allocating on a straight line basis, uniform across the month at one unit per each day of the month. And so I hope that's clear and makes sense. It's definitely something you can play with by, particularly when you break things down into variables, you can then say return each of the different variables, and you'll see kind of how that measure is put together. But if we take and we drop that here into the table, we'll get the correct numbers. And then if we drop that here into the chart, we'll also get these are the correct numbers, and these will match up down to the numbers that we see below. And so the question now is, okay, what happens if we drill down? And so let's drill down. And I love the new modern visual tooltips, which have the drill down right in them. And so if we drill down to the daily level, we'll see, okay, in this case, it's working. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is we're getting the daily expenditures, and we're getting the daily targets. And so you can calculate a variance by day, you can calculate a variance by month, and that's all good. So the question is, are we done? Can we just say that's good enough? And I would say no. I mean, a lot of people do it this way, and it's a perfectly acceptable way to do it. But there are two things about it that I don't like. One of which is that, first of all, it's fairly complicated. You know, I think if you work through this makes logical sense, but it's a lot of DAX. It's 28 lines of DAX. And, you know, spoiler alert that when we do it in Power Query, we can cut this down to 1 or 2 lines, depending on if you put a hard return in after your equal sign. So that the complexity is one thing. The second thing is that if you do it this way with treat as is not persistent in the sense that treat as exists, that virtual relationship exists only within the context of that particular measure. And so, for example, if we wanted to do a cumulative total of those budget allocations, we would have to then carry that treat as into the next measure and the next measure and the next measure. You have to keep using this because it doesn't persist outside the context of that measure. And that's not a huge problem, but it's definitely something you've got to remember to do, and you know, it adds some time and complexity. The bigger problem for me is that, let's say we want to put a slicer on here, and we want to slice by month. You can do it, but because that relationship exists only virtually, if you just put a standard date slicer up here, if we just drop the date field or the month field up here, it's not going to do anything because it's not seeing any relationship between the date table and the monthly budget table. That relationship exists only virtually within each measure. And so what you've got to do in that case, and it's doable, which is you've got to create a disconnected table, and then you've got to harvest that disconnected table in a way that also incorporates the treat as virtual relationship. And as I say, it's definitely something you can do. I've done it. It's not especially difficult, but again, it's a lot more difficult than just dropping a date field and clicking on slicer. So the question is there a way we can do this that allows us to create that physical relationship in a persistent way that doesn't require the continual virtual relationship generation in the measure, and lets us use standard tools and standard measures in the way that we're used to? And the answer is yes, we can do that. And so the way we do that is, instead of by allocating in DAX, we allocate in Power Query. And let's talk about how to do that. Let me take this measure out. Are there, before I jump into that, any questions at this point? I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you quickly, but I want to see if before I jump into the final stage, whether we've got any questions.
So there are just some few questions. Okay, so someone asked that they experience very slow visuals when they're using tweeters. Should they switch to a physical or a visual refresh so much quicker?
You know, I think what the treat as in some cases can definitely slow down the speed, and so particularly if you've got a large table that you're computing that virtual relationship. So yes, I think in the case that we're going to show of making a physical relationship between the tables, I think that is going to lead to a faster responsiveness of your report.
Okay. Then somebody was also asking about, oh, if you could share, like, would you be sharing the PowerPoint, the Power BI file, or at least the DAX formula they use for the budget relocation?
Yes, I'll be glad to share that. I don't know what the best way to do that is. Maybe send that to you guys, and then you share that out when you share out the video.
Okay. Yes, I think that should be all right.
Okay. Yeah. After the meeting, I'll definitely do that, because I think it will be helpful for people to be able to use that formula. And for those who are Analyst Hub users,
even the time intelligence video you did with Melissa, people was wanting to see it. Well, I think someone shared that. So.
Oh, somebody shared that, or did you want the link for that?
Oh, someone already shared that also. The time intelligence video with you and Melissa.
So okay. Also, I don't know if you shared all the three. You know, there were 3 links. There was that slide about Melissa time intelligence. I don't know if you remember this slide.
I think that was the second to last slide, or the last slide.
Slide on the Power Query way of doing date.
Dates. Yes, second to the last.
So
slide 6.
Oh,
second to last.
Yeah,
so
I think
the link.
Yes, this links. Yeah, this links.
Yes. So though Anthony did help us, but I just want to be sure it's everything. I think he was able to grab 2 for us. So, but this is the link that someone was asking if you just copy and paste for us in the chat box. Anything?
Yeah, I unfortunately I don't see the chat box in my screen share. But if somebody could
okay,
actually.
Remember, after the end of the session, we can do that.
Okay, not a problem.
Yeah, we can definitely do that after when I unshare screen at the end. I can definitely do that, and I will make these PowerPoint slides available as well.
Thank you.
So we can. And the thing is, if you go to the Enterprise DNA forum, if you just search on there, if you search for extended date table YouTube videos, and Melissa, you'll find this link, but we'll send that to you. Okay. Any other questions before I jump back into Power BI?
No.
Okay.
No. Those were the outstanding.
So let's talk about the actual allocation in Power Query, and let me just flip my notes here. Okay, so what we want to do is wrong Power BI file. Here we go. Let's go into Power Query. And what we want to do is transform this monthly budget table. And the first thing we want to do is basically, if you remember in the DAX formula, we created the number of days in each month, and that's going to be a critical thing to do here as well. And so what we want to do is we want to do a group by. And I always like to go advanced just because I think it gives a better view of the dialog box here. And we group by month and year. And then what we want to do is all data. And then the operation here is all rows. And the reason we want to do this is because we want to be able to expand back into the original table with all the rows. If we don't do that, it's going to aggregate and produce a table at a different level of aggregation than the one we have originally. But we want to maintain that that original level of aggregation. And then what we want to do is say, this is days in period. Let's call it days in month. And then it's going to be count rows. And so we do that. Let me go back. Hang on one sec. Grouped rows. Hang on just one sec. I don't know why I'm getting budgets. Let's just try this one more time. Okay, I know why. What we want to do first is, instead of doing the days, what we want to do is we want to merge the individual days into the monthly budget table. And so I just need to get this Teams thing out of the way. And what we want to do here is a merge.
Okay, maybe just one trick about that Teams. there's a minimize. I don't know if you see it like a minus.
There we go.
Yeah, that does it
Yes.
permanently.
Great. Okay, and so now if we go to our dates table and we go to month and year. Okay, this is what we need. Go to month and year, 24 of 24 rows. And then what this does is, if we look at this table, this will now, for each month, will pull in the individual date for that month. And that's exactly what we want. So okay, and so now what we want to do is we want to expand that out. And we just want to take the date. Okay, and so now we've gone from 24 rows to 731 rows. And we've got each of the individual dates. Now, this is where we want to go, and we want to do the group by advanced month and year. And now we take, and this is going to be our days and month. And our count rows. Okay, that's what we want. So January 31, February 29, and so forth. Okay, so now we just want to expand that out. We'll just take month and year out so we don't duplicate that. And now we've got exactly what we want, which is we've got all the days we've got the days in the month, and then we've got the budget amount. And so what we can do here now is to do an allocation of that budget amount. And let's create a custom column here. And this is going to be daily budget allocation. Okay, and so now what we want to do is we just want to say daily budget allocation is going to be the budget amount divided by the days in month. Oh, okay. Got an extra box here. Okay. And now we've got our daily budget amount. We can do that as a fixed decimal and close and apply. So we just wait for that to chug through. Okay, and so let's take a look at that. So now what we've got is we've got our monthly budgets, but we've got them allocated by date at a daily budget granularity. And so what we can do now is we can take in our data model and connect that. Scroll up here. Go to dates. Monthly budget to date. Okay, and now it connects that as a one-to-one bi-directional, but if we change that to a one-to-many and unidirectional, and we wait for that to chug through, and now we've got exactly what we want, which is we've got a one-to-many at daily granularity in a physical relationship. And so let's take a look at how that works. So what we want to do now is total daily budget allocation. And let's create that sum here of our daily budget allocation. And let's drop that into our table. And this is the numbers we've been getting before. And what we can do, we can show here that if I've got a filter on this somewhere. Okay, if we drop this into the values here, we're getting the proper values. And then if we drill down, we're getting the proper values for the daily budget allocation, and the expenditures. And what we can do now is we can slice this directly by the date table because we've got a physical relationship here. So if we just take our date table, we take month and year, we turn that into a slicer. Move that here. I've got a filter on somewhere that I'm not finding. Apologize, folks. Oh, here we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Let me just show. So this is working correctly. I just, for some reason, in the live session, I've got the slicers. I've got a filter on that I'm not finding, but the general concept is absolutely right. Let me show you just real quickly another construct. Do I have to, Michael? Do I have time here?
Yes, yes, you do.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me show you one more construct here, which is a promotional table. And this is a different way of expressing the same data. And oftentimes what you'll see is instead of month by month, particularly when we talk about promotional sales data, we'll see sales campaigns and we'll see them running from a particular start date to a particular end date. And the question is now, how do we get this in a format where we can provide it in that daily granularity? And so let's take this one and transform in Power Query. And let's go to promotional targets. And now what we want to do here is we want to create the dates individually between the start and end date. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go here. Sorry, I've got this in the way again. Is there a way I can get that bar out of the way? Okay, there we go. So now what we're going to do is add column, date, and we're going to subtract days. And then we're going to take the absolute value of these days and that just gives you the duration between these two. And then what we're going to be able to do from that is take an add column, custom column, and then just say list of dates. And then the formula we're going to use here is list.date. List.dates. And we can use, I think list.dates is the more intuitive version. There's also, because dates are actually numbers, we can actually use number.from as another function that will basically do the same thing. So if we look up here, what we want is the start date, the count as number of the number of days we want to create the date list for, and then the step is duration. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with our start date. We're going to do a count as a number, which is our subtraction. And then the step is duration. So we just want a duration of 1 day. And that's depicted in the duration function is 1, 0, 0, 0. Close that off. We close off list.dates. Let me just see if I have my duration correct. Okay, let me just jump in. Sorry, folks. Okay, I am stymied for the moment. Let me back out. But basically, let me pull up another file. Just going to pull up the completed file. And this is a version where I've worked through the detail of that promotional target. And if we go in here to transform, what we can do is go to the add custom, and there's the list.dates, start date, days and period. If we drop that down, and I don't know why the version in my other one wasn't. Oh, I think it's because I was missing a paren. Yeah, okay. But if we do that, then what we can do is go down to the next step. And what we'll get is basically in this, if we go to add custom, we'll get the days and period. And then we'll get a date list. And that date list is the list of all the dates in between the start and end date. If we extract that, then that'll extract to a list, and we can split by delimiter and then unpivot that, and we get back to the same level of granularity that we had prior in terms of that individual date column and the target amount, which we can then allocate by dividing by the days and period. And then we just remove the other columns, and we have the same basic allocation that we had for the previous version. So if we go close and apply, and then back to our promotional column here, we've got the same ability, and we drop that into in our budgeting measures. Total daily target is the sum of our promotional daily targets. And what we've got is we've got our month and year with the proper targets. And then if we drill down, to the daily level, we've got the proper granularity at the promotional level. So I apologize for a little bit of the glitchiness in doing that live, but that is the general approach. And hopefully in my fumbling a little bit in the Power Query version, it didn't obscure the message that when you allocate this directly and then link it through physical relationship, it makes the overall work much easier. That initial work in Power Query, we go from the budget allocation that looks like this to a budget allocation that looks like that. So that is really what I wanted to present today. As I say, a little bit of glitch in the live training, but that's the nature of live training sometimes. Good question Anthony has here about bridge tables. Bridge table is a way to do that. And if I go back to my file here, this is actually when I did my Enterprise DNA certification. That what I did is this is before I knew about the Power Query allocation method and the treat as. And what I did is actually created a monthly bridge here. So took that many to many relationship and created two many to ones, and then filtered that down. The problem I see with this is that, first of all, it disrupts the clean star schema. And in DAX and Power BI, it's always best to have a clean and clear star schema. The other thing is that this now becomes what you need to filter from. And so you've introduced another set of month and year, and that by By doing so, you now have to filter on that, and it makes your visuals a bit more complicated. It makes your DAX a bit more complicated. I generally don't. The bridge table approach will work, and for many years that's what people did. I just think it's suboptimal when you compare it to both the treat as approach and the Power Query allocation approach. So,
Thanks a
other.
lot. I see Federico in the house. He's saying thanks, Brian.
Yeah, Federico's. Yeah.
Did you see a message from Federico?
I did not.
It's not yet showing in your chat. But he's saying thanks. And then Aditolatu is also saying thanks. I think you've answered all the other questions up until that. But it's a very eye-opening one because for me, my students that are in here will be like, oh, Michael, you didn't tell us this in the class. Like, you didn't tell us that we could do this in Power Query and that it's got these awesome advantages. When you are showing what had to happen in the DAX for us to achieve something similar to what was made possible with the way you've done this in the Power Query, it's the message sank in for me. I kind of get it like, yeah, so we can now see the advantage of all the works in the Power Query. Yes, thanks a lot. And I'm checking if there is any other thing from anyone. Any questions from anyone? There are a lot of thank you messages coming in for you from in the chat box. So Anthony too is saying, thanks, Brian. Interesting view on the bridge table. Ibrahim is also saying thanks. LM says thank you. Temidayo too, yes. Anna. So a lot of thank you messages. I guess maybe we can start the other part, which is, I don't know which you want to do first. I see that we still have majority of the people in the house. At the point we had 20-something, and then we still have most of them. I don't know if you want to ask the question now, or do you want it to be that I ask you those two questions, and then we do the special question for him.
However you'd like to do it is fine.
Ifeanyi, how do you usually do it? I know you've been the one doing most of this recently, all the last couple of sessions.
Usually then
you
ask the other question.
What did you say?
So maybe I said we usually Brian is supposed to ask this question. You ask a question about first speak a winner. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, then
is it after I ask him the two questions?
Yes, after we ask him the questions about how he started.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask now, and then I'm going to make a few people back as presenter, since I think everybody, at least the faces I know, in case they want to say something towards the end. So, Brian, so we've gotten to the part where, for me, this is one of the most exciting parts, which is when I get to hear from you, from the special guests we have, what your journey has been like. How you got here.
Well, how I got here was pretty circuitous. That my training is an economist, and so coming out of graduate school, I started in consulting and then started working for the government in an econometrician, data analyst role, and it was particularly with regard to calculating damages for oil spills and chemical spills and hazardous waste sites. And I did a lot of economic analysis, did a lot of testimony as an expert witness in federal civil trials. If you're familiar with the Deepwater Horizon spill from about 11 years ago in the Gulf of Mexico, the biggest U.S. spill we've ever had, worked a lot on that one. And then got to a point where I really, I kind of burned out on that and wanted to try something different. And so I went into a management role and worked for about 15 years as a manager and didn't do a lot of data analysis myself at that point, but spent a lot of time hiring and training and supervising analysts. And so it was interesting in the sense that I got to see data analysis from the other side, really from the client side. I wasn't doing a lot of analysis myself, but I was requesting analysis from my analysts. And so it's been interesting to me now to come back to a more analyst role and as somebody producing analysis. And so what happened was toward the end of my government career, I got put on a project to develop a new financial system. We had a system that didn't pass an audit, and I was working directly with Microsoft on this, and they asked us a bunch of questions and came back and said, you know, we really recommend using Dynamics and Power BI. I didn't know anything about Power BI at that point, so I said I should probably learn something. And so as the project manager, so I went on Enterprise DNA, went on YouTube, and just got completely hooked on it. You know, I just couldn't get enough of it. And then, you know, started volunteering on the forum, and one thing led to another. I got to know Sam Mackay quite well through that, and that led to this job. So it's been a long road from data analyst to manager, back to data analyst, now to my current role.
You've had a really very interesting one. I don't think anyone will be lucky to have, well, not any regular person will be lucky to have worked from all those different angles of interacting with data. First, like you mentioned, needing to be the one checking other people's work and using theirs, and then move to do creating, and then now where you are not just even creating, you are also helping others to create. So really, it's a very wonderful one. I want to ask another question, which I know your current role, and not just your current role, but your work, even the organization, Enterprise DNA, you know, your being there also helps us to get a very robust answer that, you know, a lot of people will find more practical. So people who are starting this journey, people, they take interest, they suddenly realize that this is what they would like to do. And there's a whole lot of ways to go about it, but people always want to hear from someone who has done it, been there, what they should do in very straightforward, trustworthy way. Like, oh, if I do this and that, I'll be very well on my way. So what would be your advice for people starting out right now? How do you think they should approach the journey to become very good data analysts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm doing a whole seminar on that in December. It's free, it's open, it's on the Enterprise DNA site, and you can find the link to that there on our events page. I call it 10 things you need to build for a successful career in data analysis. And you know, I would say, you know, one of the obvious things is a really firm technical foundation. You know, whether it's Enterprise DNA or one of the many other really good sites out there, to build your technical knowledge. But in addition to that, I think one of the things that's incredibly valuable is your business knowledge as well, your knowledge of the business practices of whatever realm you're working in, whether that's finance or HR or energy, or you know, supply chain management, is really knowing the business side of that and being able to bring that expertise to your analysis. Because one of the biggest factors in, I think, really doing great analysis is knowing what questions to ask. And yeah, there it is. That's the session, is knowing what questions to ask, and also having a sense of what decision makers in that field are going to want to know. Because sometimes when they come to you and ask for analysis, even they don't quite know what they're looking for. And so you being able to say, what's interesting about this data? What is impactful? what's going to be relevant to actionable recommendations is really, really critical. So that business knowledge is essential. I would also say communication skills are really critical. That somebody I saw one time said, the best tool for data analysts is PowerPoint. And I thought that's ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, if you can really do great analysis, but then communicate that clearly, that is huge. And the other thing I would say is to work in community. That first of all, training will only get you so far, even the best training, because you'll watch a training, and I think we all have this experience. You watch somebody really good doing a training, and you say, that looks easy. And then you sit down in front of the computer screen, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it's only through doing it yourself and really exercising it over and over again that you really become comfortable with it and really understand things at the level they need to be understood. And I think it's really hard to do that just on your own. Doing it in community, I think, like the learning community here is a fantastic resource where you get to know people who are wrestling with the same problems. You get to bring issues to people and say, hey, what do you think of this? Can you give me your views on this? And when I hear people say, I'm hesitant to do that because I'm just learning Power BI, I just laugh and say, we're all just learning Power BI. That there's nobody out there who knows all there is to know. It's gotten impossible to do that because of how complex the program is and how much they keep adding to it. And so learning in community is essential. And the other thing I would say is get in there, get your hands dirty with projects and build a portfolio that to really have an example of your work. People can talk about the DA 100 and certifications and all. And for me, all that means is you're good at taking tests. It doesn't tell me, can you really do this stuff at a practical level? And so it's through that portfolio that, somebody who's going to be hiring can look at your work and say, okay, this is somebody who I know knows how to analyze data. And so diving in and, the data challenges, I think the enterprise DNA challenges are great. There are many other challenges, but I think getting a portfolio together that really shows what you can do and to build that portfolio in community, I think is one of the biggest keys to success. That I learn every time. I've done now, this will be my 17th challenge. And every time I do them, I learn. And I'll tell you the other thing is take the opportunity to learn on a team. That, it's perfectly fine in our challenges to team up with other folks. And the times I've done my best work and learned the most is when I teamed up with other people and worked together on entries. So those, maybe a longer answer, Michael, than you were hoping for, but those are my tips for somebody coming in new to it. That's probably the biggest things I've learned over these last 30 years.
Thanks a lot. Like I mentioned, I know that what you've given, that's why my colleague is trying to write them, and Anthony too has been helping. They are very actionable steps, and I'm sure even those who are not able to join this session, I'll let them know they should watch this to the end, to this part especially, because people have these questions. Even me, I'm beginning to fine-tune my approach to learning based on what you've said, because I do some of what you've said, but there are some you've mentioned that I see that I'm not doing, that I will explore. So I think we've come to the part where you get to pick our lucky winner for today, and you get to ask the question that will be the thing to decide. So yeah, if I think what you're displaying, I don't know, should you stop sharing screen so it doesn't distract? Or you can be posting what you want to post so we can get Brian to ask the questions, and then the people will not get distracted. They will be able to think and just type the answer. Okay, so yes, Brian.
Okay, so the question is, if you've got in Power Query, if you've got two dates and you want to create the individual dates between those dates, I talked about two functions you can use. What are the two Power Query functions to do that?
I hope we all got the question, or do you want him to repeat the question? So the way we go about it is we prefer you type the answer in the chat box. I've made you all presenters, so at this stage you can all talk, but we prefer you type the answer in the chat box, and then Brian is going to like the first correct answer. So, but are we all clear with the question? Or do you think you want him to?
You want me to repeat it?
Okay, maybe let's say you're here. Let's, just for the sake of anyone who didn't get it the first time.
Okay, so when we talked about the situation where we've got promotional budget data, and we've got two dates, a start date and an end date, and we want to create the daily granularity between those two dates. There are two functions that we can use in Power Query to do that. There may be more, but two that I mentioned. Actually, just give one of the two.
So I'm waiting for our answers.
Duration is part of it, but not the full answer. That's an intermediate step. It's actually not the number of dates. It's the actual dates themselves. List.date, correct.
Seems we've got that win for today then. So Anna, please do email us at, okay, I see my colleague is doing that. Do email us at webinar@UrBizEdge.com, and I think the only thing the thing we need is just your name and your email. We'll get you to have so the prize is a membership from Enterprise DNA. I think that's why I'm not so sad that Federico got beat, because I think Federico already has. So it's nice that the person who won, I don't think Anna has. I'm not sure she has not noticed that. It's very nice. Congratulations, Anna. And, yeah, that's it.
And then if you just send your email address to that webinar address, we'll get you set up tonight.
All right, so we've come to the end of today, and if you want to say anything, comment, or anything, you can unmute yourself now. And but we've come to the end, and thank you all for staying to the end. Thank you for always being a part of this, and a special thank you to Brian for sharing with us this very valuable thing. I know, like he said, there was a lot of thoughts he put into choosing this topic, and I'm glad he went with this topic, because for me, I'm also going to start applying the learnings from it. I'm going to go and check out the cheat sheet on that Power Query dates comprehensive way of creating a date table. So thank you to everyone. Brian, thank you very, very much. And to all our active participants today, Anna, Ladi, Federico, Anthony, and everyone. I see you all, and I say thank you. So have a very wonderful week ahead. This is where we draw the curtain for today.
Michael, thank you for having me.
For next week, we have this session.
Okay. This is our special guest for next week.
Yes,
if you are on the meetup, if I can help us drop the meetup link. So if you join the meetup link, you will always see who our next set of speakers are. So I think I need to let you all have a rest for tomorrow. So bye to everyone. And this is where I end the session. So thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you.